Doctors and nurses of Reddit, have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? Similar. But I don't know where else to put it because it just makes me laugh. My aunt is a nurse in the maternity ward. She had a couple come in where they were both very black. Lady has baby and it is white AF. Like. Totally pale. No trace of any pigment. They put the baby on her mom and the mom starts yelling about how this isn't her baby and they stole her baby. In all fairness, you can be very confused during after delivery. It wasn't stupidity. Just sobbing and freaking out, and the father is just sitting there and looks very confused because even he's realizing that even if she did cheat, there is no way the baby would be that white. The doctor and nurses are trying to assure her that this is her baby and the skin usually darkens later. Come to find out, when he called his mom, she pointed out that they have a second cousin who is albino and maybe baby got that gene. Turns out that's what happened, baby was albino. My fiance's father is almost certainly not his biological dad. His mom was just a genuinely terrible human being who didn't even try to hide the fact she was cheating. But his dad loved him from the second he was born, and when the mom decided 4 years later she just didn't want the kid anymore, she just gave him to his dad and rode off. Jay's dad ended up getting married and they tried 4 kids before finding out his sperm count was too low to ever father children. They ended up adopting many years later. He sat my fiance down when my fiance was 13 and told him the truth, and that if Jay wanted to test they would, but it was up to him. Jay cried and told him he just wanted him to be his dad, and that was the end of that. Edit: I originally had put real dad instead of biological dad. Changed it when several people pointed out that the man who raised him is most certainly his real dad. I know a girl who was pregnant with her boyfriend's best friend's baby. He found out there was a possibility about a week before she gave birth. I went up to see her once he was born and he looked just like the friend. There was no question. I broke the news to her boyfriend and he was absolutely devastated. His parents were heartbroken and super pissed. They had bought the girl everything she needed, including a $500 car seat stroller set. She refused to give anything back. She started up a relationship with the friend immediately after having their child. And they're still together a decade later. But the kicker for me has always been that the boyfriend and best friend were next door neighbors. She moved into his house after coming home from the hospital. So her ex-boyfriend and his family had to see them basically every day raising this child that they had believed to be his for the entire pregnancy. I can't even imagine. Edit: yes. They did a DNA test right after he was born. The baby was the friend's. I had a vasectomy. While chatting with the doctor, he told me about another patient. This guy had 3 kids and came in for the snip because he and his wife decided they were done having children. The doc opened up his sack and found nothing to snip. This guy was born without the ability to have any children. The poor doctor had to explain to him what happened. Imagine finding that out that way. I worked as a lab tech before I became a nurse. We had a set of twins in the NICU that were super early and the mom was still in the OR getting sewed up from the cesarean. I was drawing baby B's blood when mom was wheeled over to baby A's isolate. She was crying and said, "Oh, thank God you're not black. I have been so worried the last 7 months." So newborn babies, especially when they're born early, are very pink. Almost red. So even if a baby was part black, their skin isn't necessarily dark yet. But looking at these babies, it was obvious they were going to be black. The shape of the face, the texture of the hair, and baby B that I was working on had an intense Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my NICU nurse friend told me that the babies were now on a no info status, meaning security alert. Can't give anyone information about them. Can't refer to them by name. etc. She said there was a huge fight because the mom's husband, white guy, obviously noticed that the babies were half black and that mom had cheated on him and got pregnant. The real dad, black guy, came in and didn't realize the mom was even married. Those poor babies. Had a college buddy whose fiancée was pregnant. They were the perfect couple. Both had just over a year with great careers starting out. Everything was butterflies and rainbows. Fast forward to the delivery room. They are in there and out comes a very black baby. He's quite the pale redhead. And she's a blonde blue eyes Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay. Waited for her parents to arrive. And left without saying a word. He moved all his stuff out of the house while she was in the hospital. And cut off all communications with her. Just walked out of their lives in the most stone cold act I'd ever seen. They were together for 9 years. And he just left cold turkey. She tried to contact him at his job a few times. But he quickly moved up the ladder and eventually got a job in another city. He told me once that he took solace in the fact that her family had already dropped about $10,000 in a wedding that never happened. Edited typo. Oh man. I'm so late to this thread. I used to work in the newborn nursery at a hospital. We got the babies right from delivery. Cleaned them up. Footprinted them. Checked vitals. etc. Dads usually came in with the newborns. This dad comes in with this baby. Dad is white. Mom is white. Baby is very obviously not white. The dad was very quiet standing next to this baby. Watching us clean it up. He says quietly, "I don't think this is my baby." You could tell he was absolutely devastated. We advised him not to sign the birth certificate until he was sure. Not sure what happened after we sent the baby back out to mom. But I felt awful for the guy. Random note from the side of academia. This is why they don't do blood tests compared to your parents in my college, Marshall University, to teach basic genetics. Too many were finding out they didn't have any chance of being their father's child. I only heard the horror stories secondhand, but the results spoke for themselves. Happened to my Fee and K's mom. His mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patient like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happened to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B+. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O+ and his wife was A. This combination will never yield a B+ baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board and this look of shock washes over her. TL. Doctor father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type. Punnett squares. I'm a nurse but this didn't happen to me. Friend of mine got pregnant in high school. She claimed it was our local doctor's son's kid so he agreed to deliver his grandchild for free. Child delivered and it was obviously half African American. Doctor's son and girl were both white. I think he still delivered it for free as he was relieved his 14-year-old son wasn't a dad. Edit. Forgotten apostrophe. The doctor didn't impregnate a teenager. It was supposedly his son's kid. It wasn't. My son came out and looked really tan. My ex-girlfriend and I are pretty white. I thought for a second she cheated on me. We are now separated for different reasons and related to our child. And he is pasty white as hell. Got one heck of a suntan in the uterus though. It's funny how some kids can get some random gene that neither parent shows. My oldest son is ridiculously dark. The whole family is blindingly white, 3 other siblings, but he looks Hispanic almost in skin color. Paternity has been established on him. No questions there. He's just our bronzed little man who is allowed to see sunlight without 3 feet of sunblock on. Since he doesn't sizzle up the second the sun hits him. The little show off. Worked in the army hospital on FT Lewis. A woman came in for belly pain and we found out and told her she was 10 weeks pregnant. The husband at the bedside started laughing. Grabbed his coat and left the room explaining to us that he had been in Afghanistan until 3 weeks prior. He looked back at her and just said, well, that's that Brittany. I always liked how classily he left her while she just silently stared off into space. This is often the hardest for most male soldiers who go off and leave their pretty wife behind. And comes home to find out their wife been knocked up or such. The part I really hate the most is when the wife would duck the husband after finding out she is pregnant just so she can present him with a baby when he comes back from Tatur. All while screwing with the actual father when her husband is on deployment. Not quite what you're asking, but in the same vein. I'm a nurse in a level 4 neonatal ICU. We service the sickest of the sick from our state and the surrounding states. So we see it all. We had a baby that was sick as snot. Lo and behold, we discovered its blood spinal fluid. ETC was septic with herpes. In most babies. We avoid this by treating the herpes while the mom is pregnant. In this case, the mom didn't even know she was a carrier. So where did it come from? This is the awkward and sickening moment when everyone in the room realized where the herpes came from. Turns out, the father had an affair and contracted the virus from his lover. So yeah. While this woman's baby is on the verge of death, she finds out her husband has been cheating on her and his cheatiness is the reason their baby is sick. My best friend was dating a girl and knocked her up. They got engaged and planned to get married right after the baby was born. There were about 10 of us in the waiting room waiting for her to crank out the baby. It was essentially her parents, his were in another state, some of her friends, and some of ours. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he walks out with a smirk on his face and says, let's go. We all thought something horrible had happened. Her friends ask how the baby is. And he said fine. But black. He motioned for us to go. So we followed him. In the parking garage. He tells us to follow him to his apartment. Then sends me a text asking I could put him up for a while. We literally moved him out of his apartment and into my spare bedroom in like an hour tops. Her parents didn't know who to be mad at. The confusion on their faces when he told them the baby was black was priceless. I'm not a nurse. My professor was an land nurse and she once saw a man running between 2 delivery rooms. Both women he had impregnated went into labor and gave birth the same day. Supposedly the one he was married to was angry because the woman he cheated with was impregnated after the wife but had her kid 10 minutes before the wife. Land is apparently the most drama-filled section of hospitals. Miso is planning to be a nurse and he's going to work in land neonatal this year and I'm excited to hear any dramatic stories. My grandmother was a nurse. Once she was assisting with delivering a baby and the ostensible father commented that the child looked good for a premature baby. Without thinking, my grandmother told the truth. That baby is not premature. So I guess I know where I get my social obliviousness from. I don't think that's social obliviousness. Like, there's no obligation to sit there and consider how someone could possibly be lying so you could cover it up for them. If their dumb ass lies about something that easily blown open, they deserve to get it blown open. Kinda off topic, but I gotta give my friend credit for doing something I don't think I could ever do. Found out after being married and having a 3 and 1 year old his wife had been cheating on him. Multiple times. With multiple men. Everyone is white though, so no obvious signs. Anyway. When he finds that there is the chance neither of the kids is his, he buys 2 paternity tests. He brought them home. But then the horrible conclusion hit him. He was prepared if they were his. He was prepared if they weren't. He had no ducking idea what he would do if one was and one wasn't. So he threw tests away. They divorced. She keeps seeing people for short times and he is now remarried to a fantastic person. Not a doctor, but a distant cousin of mine definitely has children that don't belong to the father. My cousin was adopted as an infant and was essentially a crack baby. She struggled with some developmental issues and has a low IQ compared to most, but can still live on her own with little to no issues. She, a white woman, married a Latino guy, really dark brown skin, several years ago, and they had a son together who has dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. He is easily identified as their son. The real trouble happens years later. Her husband, who we'll call Javier, has some IQ issues of his own. Just a little slow when it comes to tasks and reasoning. Anyway, Javier is in the military and gets deployed internationally for about 6 months. When he comes home, his wife is 4 months pregnant. You do the math. He still believes the baby is his own, even after it's born with pale skin and blonde hair and blue eyes. If that wasn't bad enough, it happens again 2 years later with another baby. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone knows she slept with a different man. It was actually her high school boyfriend. But Javier still thinks the children are his. It's kind of sad. But at this point there's not much you can do. He has raised the kids as his own. A co-worker's aunt just found out her dad wasn't actually her dad. So she was really big into genealogy and had mapped out her family tree as far as she could go. She took one of those ancestry DNA tests about 2 months ago, and her father's side didn't line up with what she was expecting. In fact, she didn't recognize a single name that she was matched with paternally. She casually asked her dad if he knew any of the names, and he recognized the surname of the maintenance man at the apartment complex where he and his wife, aunt's mom, lived shortly after they had gotten married. Claimed he was a lousy repairman who always flirted with his wife, etc. Aunt's mom had passed away a few years ago, so she decided to not tell her dad the news. I was blood typing a newborn once. Mom was an O+. Baby was AB+, which is more or less not possible. I immediately panicked, because Jesus God, they mixed up the babies. Someone has the wrong baby. We're gonna get sued. They're gonna have to genetic test the entire nursery. What if they subpoena me for being the idiot who discovered the problem? I don't have insurance. What if they sue me? After repeating the test 3 times, I called the floor and told them that they'd either drawn the wrong baby's blood, or they'd switched babies because mom couldn't be the baby's mother. Lol, no. It was a donor egg. The redraw matched fine. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. Oh god, my heart. Though. Happened to a dude I knew. He got his GF pregnant just as he was about to break up with her. She was trashy and he came from a rich family. But she was pregnant, so he did the right thing. Turns out that the kid wasn't his, so he kicked them both out. Apparently the father of the baby was some poor deadbeat. I love happy endings. Not a doctor nurse, but my dad was accused of being the father to a child that wasn't his. I grew up in a rough chav estate in England. So when you think of the characters in this story, imagine Shameless style men women. Anyway, my dad was accused by a woman he slept with. My dad wasn't exactly the most faithful man. That the child was his, even though the child was mixed. The woman was white, and so is my dad. The case actually went to the Trisha show, like the Jeremy Kyle show, but older. The test results came out, and shockingly enough, he wasn't the father. We have the recording taped at home and I like it to watch it sometimes. It's honestly kind of comforting in a weird way. I also always thought shows like Jeremy Kyle were faked, but sadly, they aren't, or at least some of them aren't. I'll never forget one moment from the show when Trisha asked my dad, "Do you have any other kids?" And he just smirked. We never really found out how many women he got pregnant in that time. And it's likely I went to school with my brothers and sisters, but neither of us knew we had the same dad. I never really found out what happened to the woman or to the baby either. But I truly do hope that baby grew up healthy and happy. And I hope the mother found peace with herself. Not in the hospital, but a friend and his GF were on again off again and she got pregnant. She swears it's his. He wants a paternity test. He moves in with her and her mom. She has the baby. Take the test. Test is taking a while to come back. Him and his family are over the moon with the baby. Kinda forget about it. Mentions it to GF's mom one day and she says, "Oh yeah. She didn't tell you? Came back a while ago. Totally your baby, awesome. All is well." A few months later they're moving out and he finds the test in a box. Not his baby. He left. Tried to stay in the baby's life but she wouldn't let him. Nurse here. Once had a couple come in. Just them. The father was black and the mother was white. The father was so involved. So ecstatic about him becoming a father for the second time with this woman. Nothing really seemed off. Until she started pushing. The baby girl came out completely white. Blonde hair and blue eyes. Usually black babies come out a little pale. But this was just straight out white. We had to escort the father out for fear of him becoming violent. But he just sat outside the room. On the ground with his face in his hands. That was one of the saddest moments I think I've ever seen with a father. Besides stillbirth. Odd thing after though. The mom didn't want the baby and wanted nothing to do with the father. Probably out of guilt. So she left the responsibility of this baby and their other 2-year-old boy to this man who didn't even question taking on this child. My husband and I were visiting our friends who just had a baby. We are the godparents, and we were standing in the hallway talking to both sets of grandparents. Well, apparently the hospital has a rule that only 5 visitors may be present in the hallway. But the security guard had let all 6 of us in for some reason and we didn't realize it. This nasty nurse comes up to us. Notes that there are 6 of us. Tells us someone will have to leave immediately. And then turns to my husband and says, "Oh. Are you the daddy without missing a beat?" He says. "That's what we're all trying to figure out here." She gets a look of horror on her face and backs away.